Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you and welcome for joining today's Leadership Roundtable on Net Zero Carbon for Built Environment. My name is Hong. I'm the Regional Director of IC Hong Kong. Climate change is the most pressing issue of our time. The Hong Kong government has set of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. Our infrastructure and buildings accounts for a significant portion of carbon emission in Hong Kong, and therefore it is very important to explore how we can achieve net zero carbon for our built environment. Today, we are very glad to have our ICE President, Rachel Skinner, together with an expert panel with a wide spectrum of background, including policymakers, developers, consultants, contractors, and utility company. Each of our speakers will deliver a short presentation, followed by a panel discussion which will be moderated by Mr. C.K. Mack. So our speaker would very much like to interact with our online audience. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the question box in your WebEx control panel. We will respond to as many questions as we can during the panel discussion session at the end. So without further ado, I would like to invite our ICE President, Rachel Skinner, to go on stage and deliver the keynote speech. Rachel, please.
Very much, Hong, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. I can see we've got a fantastic audience listening in to this roundtable event. It's a complete pleasure to be here, even if here has to be virtual this year. Luckily, we're all getting very good at these online events now, aren't we? So yes, we'll do our best in terms of, first of all, sort of me speaking to you all briefly, but then also hearing from a fantastic range of speakers a little bit later on, so we can hopefully get some good questions flowing, as you just heard. So I'm going to talk briefly about two things today. First of all, a little bit around my theme for my year as ICE President, but then a bit more around where, well, from an ICE point of view, and what we've been doing with respect to climate action recently, particularly because actually the international collaboration piece around this really is becoming absolutely crucial now. I'm really, though, very genuinely keen to hear about all the great work that is being done in Hong Kong a little bit later on in this event, because I think there's a lot we can do to learn and share more with each other in terms of you know, where some of the good work is hiding, and we can bring that in other places in the world as well. So I suspect that most of you by now know that my whole year as ICE President has been laser focused on just one very big and complicated theme. I've called it Shaping Zero, as I'm sure many of you know if you saw the film that launched as part of my inauguration, which was back at the beginning of November last year. In summary, though, it's basically all about the crucial importance of focusing on climate action and the role that we, as the Institution of Civil Engineers, as engineers more generally, as infrastructure experts, that the role that all of us need to play and take responsibility for all over the world if we're going to secure a net zero carbon position in as short a time as possible, and if we're going to defend against the onward impacts of climate change that we know are still to come. And of course, that is the key to our long run future on the planet. And to me, the reason why this theme really matters, the reason why I chose it, the reason why I'm still passionate about talking about it, and why I'm not bored of talking about it, even after almost a year of doing nothing really but speak about Shaping Zero in various online forums all over the world, it's because we, as engineers, as infrastructure specialists, just have this enormous responsibility, but also a massive opportunity when it comes to climate change. We know that roughly 70% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions are related to infrastructure in some way, and that's both because of the way we plan and design and build things, so the actual processes we use when we create new assets, but also because of the behaviours that we effectively enable and lock in when we create that infrastructure, when it comes into use for generations and generations to come. So every single infrastructure asset, doesn't matter if it was new or if it's old, every single one would have had a carbon impact when it was built. and most of them also continue to have an impact and use those assets and systems every single day. And those carbon emissions matter because they are the primary cause of climate change in the world today, as I'm sure we all appreciate. And it does feel that this theme has been particularly well timed, actually, because we'll all be aware of events that have been unfolding all over the world, even just in the last few weeks and months. The impacts of climate change are just so obvious, whether you look at the fatal flooding that's happened in China and Germany, New York, whether you look at fatal heat waves and wildfires in the western states and Canada. We know now that we are already looking at global temperature rises of 1.3 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial levels, and we all know that we're working to a backdrop where we're trying to limit the total temperature rise to just 1.5 degrees. So we are dangerously close to already exceeding that limit, and in fact it's looking pretty unlikely, unless we get on with really rapid action here, that we will exceed that limit. So I think that the key point here is these aren't minor sort of insignificant events that we can rationalize as things that are happening elsewhere to other people. It doesn't matter where we are in the world, this issue is affecting us right here and right now, and we know we're dealing with huge global systems that will just take decades to adjust once we start to really get serious on a much bigger scale about the climate action we actually need to take. So our role, really, our job, I suppose, is to acknowledge all of that and simply to stop causing this harm, and also put right the harm of the past, and just making sure that we are doing everything we can to defend against these impacts that will lie ahead. So I know that from a Hong Kong point of view, there is a lot of good work already going. I know there's a lot of work that's been done in the past in terms of policy setting, and that's been coming through in terms of delivery. And I know there is some great practice to share more widely, which is why I'm really keen to join this event and listen to the other speakers a bit later on today. But our real challenge here is that this isn't just about a few people doing things well. This is about the whole of our industry, all of our sectors, the whole of the world starting to do things differently, particularly in the industrialized world, where we know that we already have these systems in place that are going to need such a lot of change, but also in parts of the rest of the world. So, for example, the global south, where we need to make sure that we don't end up bringing through solutions that actually make the problem worse. So the exact solutions, the exact ideas, the innovations that we're going to need are going to vary, of course, depending on the context, depending on the geography, depending on the current impact, the potential for change. But the point here is that every single one of us has a really crucial role to play. And even if that feels like quite a small contribution, it will make a significant difference overall. And I think the other point, really, sort of in overall terms, that keeps on striking me, which keeps on coming back to me over the course of this year, is that we also have to remember that this issue, whether it's to do with climate action overall, or whether it's specifically to do with the net zero carbon piece of that problem, is that this is not just a pure maths exercise. This is a world systems problem where the whole of the set of systems in the background are actually changing all the time. It's not simply a case of saying, we understand what the carbon impact is, therefore if we subtract that out again, then somehow we'll achieve this magic position of net zero and everything will be fine. Actually, we need to remember that the speed really matters, and in fact, as more time passes, the baseline conditions are also shifting, and so that sort of maths approach may or may not prove to be sufficient as we go forward. So it really does matter that we get this moving as quickly as possible. We inspire as many other people to join us, I guess, on this journey as we go forward. So in order to turn climate talk into climate action, I'm finding it's quite useful to describe the sorts of things we need to do in two parts. The first element is our attack strategy. So this is how we are going to get to net zero carbon. It's the plan to cut carbon from anything and everything that we do as far as we possibly can. It's to bring through new solutions to process more carbon out of the atmosphere as fast as we can. It's everything we can do to decarbonize and to get to that net zero position as fast as possible. That's the attack strategy. It's completely essential. It's very urgent. And as I've been saying, there are so many practical actions we can each take to help us get towards that goal. And one of the questions I get asked an awful lot is, well, are you saying then that we can't build anything, or that we have to get to an absolute zero carbon position sort of from tomorrow morning, or are you saying we simply have to stop? And the answer is No from an infrastructure point of view, because we obviously need the function of infrastructure. We want the benefits of infrastructure and so on. But what we have to do as we're creating things, as we're amending the existing systems, as we're using those systems going forward, we have to understand the impacts, and we have to find ways to just reduce those impacts in a carbon sense down as fast as we can, and then work out how to mitigate or offset any remainder as quickly as we can. But all of that is just one piece of the action. That's just the attack strategy that will get us to a place where the net zero carbon potential becomes something that is more real, rather than something that's hanging out in, you know, maybe we'll get there by 2050 if we all work together. We've really got to start to get into that. But the second piece is our defence strategy. And this is the other side of the same coin. Because we're too late to avoid any impacts of climate change, because we've already set in train a lot of these changes to our global systems, which will take as much as 30 years for us to actually see on the ground in terms of the impact of those changes, we know we need to play a defence game as well. And this is where all the pieces to do with resilience and adaptation fit in, all the pieces where we learn to cope with more frequent and more intense climate events and natural disasters because of these shifts in our systems that our past actions have already created, and which our current actions will continue to make worse unless we can get the attack strategy right, essentially. So we cannot ignore these climate risks. We've got to do both the attack and the defence, and as I say, we have to do everything as quickly as we possibly can, because apart from anything else, that the 2050 target, for example, for net zero that is shared by Hong Kong and many other places around the world, actually it's all very well us saying that that is a target we want to aim for, but we don't know if we have time to allow the next 30 years to pass before we get to that point. We simply have to get there as quickly as we can. And again, this is where Hong Kong, to me, is interesting, because I know you have managed to make quite a number of policy changes at some speed. I'm really interested to think about how other places might do similar and go faster in terms of making these changes. So to me, as you can probably tell from the way I'm talking, I think these are really exciting times for civil engineers, for infrastructure specialists, because our solutions lie at the heart of both that attack strategy and the defence strategy for climate action. There is just so much to do, and there is so much we can do just to redefine what we now stand for, make our role much more visible, and just show the world through our actions that what we do is really going to matter for these decades ahead. And of course, that's why I've spent all year asking people, as I'm sure many of you have seen, my sort of big question, which is, when it comes to climate action, when it comes to everything I've just been describing, what are you each going to do? Because actually it is about individual action. But that brings me around very neatly just to speak briefly about what I've been doing and what the Institution of Civil Engineers has been doing in response to this climate emergency. Just to list them briefly now, but obviously I'm very happy to talk a bit more about any of these if it's useful. The first thing that we've done, which was absolutely essential from an institutional point of view, is that we've put climate action at the very top of the ICE's international strategic agenda for the next 5 years. So there's an item in there now to do with decarbonisation, so the attack strategy piece, the net zero piece, and there is also a second string in there to do with climate resilience, so the defensive bit. Now, of course, those aren't the only two things that sit on the international strategic direction list. There are other things on there as well. So, for example, pieces to do with productivity, to do with digital, to do with safety and so on, because we have to do the climate action piece as well as all the other things that we were trying to do well before. And they're not instead of it. It's an addition to what we need to think about and so on. But overall, we've got a list of roughly 5 or 6 strategic directions of travel where over the next 5 years we really want to make a significant difference in terms of what we're doing. And as part of that, to do with the decarbonisation side of things, we've launched an advisory board. We've launched essentially called the Carbon Project, which is now leading on the ICE's publications in terms of the carbon space overall, but also taking ownership of some of the initiatives that the ICE is now leading on. For example, the update of the UK standard to do with carbon management called PAS 2080, which it is my aspiration, I hope once we've done an update, to turn into an international standard, an ISO, in order that others can take full advantage of it across the world in terms of how to best manage the carbon out of our systems, how best to decarbonise, how best to reduce down the impacts of what we do as quickly as possible. We're also now setting up a leadership role to do with low carbon concrete, knowing that concrete or cement production is responsible for 8% of global carbon emissions. It seems only right that from a civil engineering point of view, we would take some ownership and responsibility of figuring out how to bring through some of the new technologies and innovations in a really rapid way to spread that knowledge and that expertise as quickly as possible, so that more and more projects and programs can take advantage of the new technologies in order to reduce down that impact that we know we're having all the time across the world. We've also set up a Carbon Champions program trying to showcase best practice. So I'm hoping actually to hear some examples today from people where if we know we are reducing carbon from what we would normally do, if we could quantify that and say the impact would normally have been however big, and now we've found a way to reduce it down to something that's significantly smaller, we are celebrating this new thinking. We are recognising the people and the teams who are responsible for that thinking by identifying them as carbon champions and building a community of those people who will hopefully inspire others to join in as well, and to realise that actually sometimes these things aren't that difficult. It just needs a different way of thinking. We're also doing some work to change the academic course content as widely as we can, so that civil engineers of the future will actually understand these issues, not just to do with climate action, but more generally to do with the Sustainable Development Goals. We're changing what we expect from our qualified members, whether it's people coming in as technicians or incorporated members or as chartered civil engineers, to make sure that they understand how important the sustainability attribute is in particular. We'll also be bringing that through into fellowship and potentially into our new chartered infrastructure engineer qualification that we're hoping to be able to offer from next year. And beyond all of that, we've got more international collaboration bubbling. So, for example, we're part of the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, which is very closely linked into COP26 and other activities this year, but also more generally, it's a really useful network of people working on issues to do with climate action across the world. We've been engaging with the American Society of Civil Engineers, the Canadian Society of Civil Engineering and others, and really all agreeing that this is something that we really need to focus on and we need to work on together, because we don't need to all come up with the different solutions separately on this particular topic. And I guess finally, that the last thing that I find really interesting is that for the first time ever, I believe, from an ICE point of view, we're going to have 5 presidents in a row, so me plus the next 4. We know who those people are, and they are all going to be speaking from one sort of aspect of their own personal choice. They're all going to be speaking, though, about climate action as they see it to be important from their own perspective and so on. We know this isn't a one-year task. It's no good me talking about it for 1 year and then walking off and then having somebody talk about something completely different. So I find it exciting that we're going to link this together, so that actually for the next 5 years we will have this focus on climate action that I've been describing. So I will stop talking there. As I say, I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other speakers today and joining in the discussion a little bit later on. But hopefully that's a useful, I guess, overview of what I'm working on, where I'm coming from, and where I see we need to go next from an institution of civil engineers point of view, if we are going to have the proper response to climate change and continue to shape the world as we want to by protecting communities and helping them grow for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for the keynote speech. So, let's very quickly introduce Michael Fong. Michael Fong is the head of Sustainable Land Health Office of Civil Engineering and Development Department, CEDD. Michael is going to share with us the carbon reduction measures for new town development projects in Hong Kong. So without further ado, I would like to invite Michael to go on stage. So Michael, please.
So thank you very much. Okay, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this graph, which shows the current greenhouse gas emissions characteristics in Hong Kong. As at 2019, electricity generation and transport together contribute about 84% of greenhouse gas emissions, while waste management contributes 7%. Next slide, please. Now, while one of the key contributors towards achieving carbon neutrality for Hong Kong will surely be switching to a zero-emission fuel, there are still a lot that need to be done in a journey towards achieving carbon neutrality, especially when we plan and design our new development projects as part of the government's policy goal of providing land to meet the housing, economic, and social needs of our current generation and beyond. CDD, in conjunction with planning departments, are actively undertaking the planning and implementation of 2 strategic growth areas and a number of new development areas, which, when add up together, will create more than 4,500 hectares of development land. Next slide, please. In essence, to achieve carbon neutrality, we have adopted a 3-step approach for SGAs and NDAs. The first step is to reduce demand-side energy consumption through better planning, transport arrangement, building and infrastructure design. Our aim is to reduce our reliance on energy without compromising on our living quality. The second step is to reduce emissions from electricity generation through the more use of on-site renewable energy production, such as solar and wind. But despite all the decarbonization efforts made, there may still have residual emissions. And our final step to address this is to remove these remaining emissions. Next slide, please. There are quite a number of initiatives under each aspect, but I'm not going to go through them in details in the interest of time. Go back. Yes, this one. But briefly on planning of the SGAs and NDAs, our focus is to encourage more green commuting, such as creating living avenue with well-integrated pedestrian and cycling network that connect various precincts, developments, public spaces, and activity nooks. Next slide, please. The potential is even higher for locations like the artificial islands in central waters that provide large area for comprehensive and holistic planning. At present, we are considering to implement a 3-tier 15-minute neighborhood concept, whereby people can reach out different levels of facilities in 3 cycles. In 3 circles, I'll say that, namely a 15-minute walking circle, a 15-minute cycling circle, and a 15-minute transit circle. Our objectives are to encourage diversity of uses and activities at neighborhood scale, minimize the need for motorized transportation, and enhance walking experience. Next, please. In terms of transportation, our railway network serves as the backbone of Hong Kong's low-carbon public transport network, and we will continue to provide new comprehensive and accessible railways to meet the transportation needs of the SGAs and NDAs. We are also actively considering the provision of integrated transport hubs and environmentally friendly services to promote and encourage the use of green public transport. Next slide, please. I'll just skip the initiatives on the building side, because I understand that Donald is going to talk about this in great detail. So I'm going to skip this one. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of infrastructures, we will allow provisions for first the district cooling system as an energy efficient air conditioning system. Second, common utility tunnels, such that maintenance and repair works can be carried out without digging up roads. And third, the use of recycled water for toilet flushing and irrigation, etc., etc. Next slide, please. To enhance sustainability through synergy, in our planning of the artificial islands in the central waters, for example, we are developing a co-park concept whereby waste treatment plants, recycling facilities, energy generation facilities, DCS, etc., will be integrated within a dedicated area on the artificial island. And surely we will provide sufficient electric vehicle charging facilities to support the wider use of electric vehicles. Next slide, please. As for our second strategy on optimizing on-site renewable energy production, we will maximize the opportunities through better integration of solar panels and wind turbines with infrastructure and buildings, and allow sufficient flexibility in our land use planning to support use of potential emerging renewable energy sources such as hydrogen. Next slide, please. Another key source of renewable energy production is to use waste-to-energy technologies for organic waste, municipal wastes, etc. In the SGAs and NDAs, we are actively exploring the opportunities of providing well-planned recycling and waste management facilities to enable such waste-to-energy conversion. Next slide, please. Last but not least, to remove the remaining carbon emissions, we are actively looking into three key areas, focusing on creating urban forests with biodiversity design, enhancing the green coverage, and providing more blue-green infrastructures. Our objectives is to not only on absorbing the ambient carbon dioxide through these measures, but provide a more environmentally friendly and pleasant environment for the people to enjoy. Okay, that's a very quick and brief presentation from my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for your excellent presentation. Now, I would like to invite Donald Choi. Donald is the CEO of Chinachem Group. Donald will share with us how Chinachem adopts innovation and technologies to reduce carbon emission for group. Oh, cool.
So as Rachel stated in her introduction, climate change is one of the defining issues of our times, and we need to act now. We really need to do much more than just talking and take real action as quickly as we can. Governments around the world have introduced legislation and policy initiatives to tackle climate change, supported by a growing recognition by businesses of the importance of climate action. Implementation of the Paris Agreement requires economic and social transformation. Private and public sectors need to work together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build resilience to cater for the impacts of global warming. Now, as an architect, I recognize the challenge for built environment, since 40% of global carbon emissions comes from buildings and construction. The percentage is even higher in Hong Kong, with buildings account for 90% of electricity used in Hong Kong, generating over 60% of Hong Kong's carbon emission. Chinachem Group, as a developer and corporate citizen in our community, we care about our carbon footprint and how we can make a contribution to a greener and sustainable Hong Kong. Net carbon zero building will primarily be an energy efficient building, so it makes commercial sense as well. We have set various strategic roadmaps and sustainability plan since 2019. We have pledged under our CCG 3038 plan to achieve 30% carbon emission reduction by 2030. We are also committed to setting scientific-based targets to help limit global warming to below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. We have implemented various initiatives to advance green buildings and construction, including developing sustainable procurement guidelines to assist and realize the sustainable and low carbon design in our projects. In all our major projects, we aim to achieve the BEAM Plus Gold rating or above, including our recent development in Mount Anderson and so on. We also are targeted to achieve at least a 12% saving against local building energy code. We are the first kind of developer in Hong Kong to introduce the entertainer, a type of battery power generator in our site, so eliminate the use of diesel generator during construction. Various other assessment tools we have been employed and deployed into our project, and we actually collaborate with numerous kind of industrial peers, such as CLP joining the Power Coalition in Low Carbon Charter. So we would like to work with many industrial players to advance our goal. As I mentioned, we are one of the first in Hong Kong to use the battery type generator to replace traditional diesel generators. We also use a modular kind of integrated construction in our development, so that our residential flats, they are actually built in factory rather than on site, saving energy and waste. We target to achieve at least the second highest rating in green building certificate in all our major developments, and obviously we use digitized tools to help us to run our project and manage our project much more efficiently, including monitoring all the energy used during construction. Innovation and technology, we believe they are very important elements in how we can actually advance green construction. So we use a lot of tools to help us to monitor the project lifecycle cost, and not only the construction energy use. We hopefully can use technology to improve our project efficiency and productivity. We use BIM, Nova platform, Oracle, Connect, etc., to really monitor our project and do a better coordination so that we are reducing waste. And we are also deploying a lot of IoT equipment into our construction methodology so that the coordination can be done seamlessly. In terms of collaboration, we actually reach out to outside our construction usual development field. For example, we partner with the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park to launch a range of initiatives, encourage various smart city solutions. We have a program called CCG Excel, powered by Hong Kong STP, kind of propelling high potential startup, through our pilot to mass adoption process to apply the startup technology in our construction and in our building site. We are also supporting various startups to test out their energy efficient system in our project, including the recently opened Central Market. So in conclusion, I think it is really a team effort that we are promoting. So we want to collaborate with various partners to tackle the global warming issues. And it is not just about improving sustainability of the building, but really able to provide win-win solution, not only for the private enterprise, but also for the community as well. And as developer, I think we have a major responsibility in how we build and how we operate our building. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald, for sharing the great initiatives from Chattercam. Thank you. So next, I would like to invite Albert Lai to share with Albert Lai is the CEO of Carbon Care Asia. I would like to invite Albert to share with us the net zero strategies for businesses, governments, and communities.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm very glad to be invited to this roundtable. It certainly is a hot topic of the day about net zero. And can you go to the next slide, please? Now, because these days, when we talk about net zero, there's some, maybe it's time to clarify one important concept, because people tend to confuse between carbon neutrality and net zero. Can I have the next slide? Well, first of all, I mean, net zero is really a topic we are very passionate about, because we are a mission-driven business, mission-driven consultancy, and when we set up 13 years ago, our target is very clear. We try to focus and to achieve, to accelerate to a net zero economy, and that is what we've been trying to help with for the private sector. Now, when I talk about net zero, I think we must be careful about the concept. Now, at the moment, over 70 countries in the world have committed to a net zero target. Most of them are actually on or before 2050, as you can see here. Some of them has achieved it, and some of them actually have put it into law, and some of them are actually set in policy documents and so on. And that, I think in the context of Hong Kong, we need to make it quite clear that Hong Kong's commitment so far is about carbon neutral by 2050. It's not exactly net zero. And in China's case, is committing to carbon neutral 2060. Right? Now, the reason why there is a difference between net zero and carbon neutral is that because carbon neutral is a relative concept. For example, if you are about to build a power plant, but instead you build a wind farm, then you avoided certain emissions. So that sort of avoidance concept, is related to carbon neutral. But whereas when we talk about net zero, we are really talking about on or before 2050, we really have to remove all the residual emissions, all the unabated emissions from the atmosphere. So that's why that sort of removal concept is very, very important. And that removal concept is generally lacking when we talk about carbon neutral. Right? And of more importance, unless we can achieve net zero, we will not be able to keep to the 1.5 degree pathway, which all scientists think that we have to. Now, maybe I use this graph to make it a bit clearer. Now, I certainly appreciate Donald's explanation, about how much they have been doing, like some other leading companies in Hong Kong in carbon reduction. But that is only part of the story. If you can see here, let's say companies like China Chem can achieve the science-based target, which Donald has mentioned that by 2021 to achieve that, and I hope that the science-based target these days we need to talk about a pathway. The only pathway that we really should talk about is 1.5 degrees, not the 2 degree pathway, not the well below 2 degrees, because that's things of the past. I think consensus is that we should, as Rachel started at the very beginning, we should aim to achieve 1.5 degree full stop. Now, we may or may not achieve it, but I think for science-based targets, they actually are revising their standard this year to make sure that all the pathways, they will approve in future will be aligned with 1.5 degree, right? That's one. Now, this is abatement. This is about carbon reduction, whether it's by country, by city, or by companies. But that is not really enough, because as you can see here, despite the best effort to reduce carbon, every company or every city still have a significant unabated or residual emissions. But by 2050, before our net zero target date, we must remove these residual emissions from the atmosphere. And this is where the purple chart comes into picture. This is what we call neutralization. We have to find ways. For example, there are actually only two ways. One is nature-based solutions, for example, planting trees, or some blue carbon absorption, or technology-based solutions like carbon sequestration. You may have heard about the first commercial scale carbon sequestration plant in Iceland, just commissioned last month. Now, I mean, these technologies are not yet commercially viable. But as we go down the road, I mean, carbon removal is the key. Now, but before we go down the road, we need to also consider compensation, meaning that companies should consider investing in carbon avoidance credits outside their value chain. And that is also important. I mean, in Hong Kong's case, for example, I mean, could companies like China Chem invest in offshore wind farm so that you can get some carbon avoidance credits to compensate for your unabated emissions? Or should the government allow private companies to invest in vessels, floating solar plants on vessels and so on? I mean, that will help them to compensate their unabated emissions. And that is important for a net zero strategy for companies, because without that, net zero is only partially complete, when you focus only on abatement. Now, this is another chart to let you to highlight a bit, because I think most companies at the moment still focus on abatement as reduction measures, which is good, which is important, but that is not enough. So we have to start to focus on compensation measures that's outside your value chain to reduce emissions. And as we move on to 2050 or towards the net zero target date, we need to focus on neutralization, that is carbon removal from the atmosphere. Now, but some companies have actually got a plan for it. I mean, I put it here as an example. Microsoft has already announced what they call a climate positive strategy or carbon negative strategy. It's a bit confusing, but let's stay with the word climate positive, right? The reason why they say it's climate positive is that they are fully aware that despite their best effort, for example, they have already got 100% renewable energy for their operations and so on, but they still have a lot of unabated emissions. So what they have decided to do is that they would use carbon avoidance credits in the interim and then transition to carbon removal, towards 2030. I mean, they have set themselves their own carbon, own net zero target date as 2030, way before 2050, which is obviously a good thing. Though not many companies can achieve it, but I think this is one example we should look at. I think all companies will need eventually a climate positive strategy, and similarly for cities as well. When Michael talks about all the NDAs and so on, so we have not seen yet a climate positive strategy, and that is important for any infrastructure developments. Now, this slide is about the building sector. I think Donald has shared it. I won't go into it in detail, but I think what's important is that in Hong Kong's case, we are located in a very sensitive region, in fact, in a very vulnerable region. Out of the top 10 most vulnerable cities that are subject to, that are prone to sea level rise, 2 of them are in our region. One is Hong Kong, the other is Guangzhou. These 2 are among the top 10 most vulnerable cities in terms of assets, that are exposed to future sea level rise. Now, and therefore, this chart here shows you, this is only a partial survey. This is a survey on REITs, on real estate investment trust. Now, and you can see that how much of their assets are vulnerable, are exposed to future sea level rises. So that you can recognize many familiar names. China Chem's name is not in it, but because China Chem is not a REIT. But anyway, this gives you a picture of how vulnerable we are, and therefore now, apart from all the climate positive strategies, abatement, compensation, and neutralization, there's one more issue we need to worry about, which is about adaptation. Now, for adaptation, I think for Hong Kong companies, especially for developers, one very important task is to undertake climate resilience assessment for all your portfolios, all your facilities and buildings. Now, this is a methodology we adopt. I won't go into detail here, but essentially you can see that for every building For every building, there are different levels of resilience. We need to look at protection of people, protection of assets. We need to look at the supply chain stability. So when there's a sea level rise or when there's extreme weather events like super typhoon, you know, how to ensure uninterrupted supply of electricity, gas, water, communication, and so on. And also capacity for recovery and transitional opportunities. I mean, now we have done this for a couple of sites in Hong Kong, but then my feeling is that most companies are still, this is still at the infancy. So we certainly I certainly hope that the government will also encourage more companies to go through this assessment, because this is essential for us to protect valuable assets in Hong Kong, and also the protection of all the users, all the people, customers, tenants, and workers in those facilities. I think I may stop here, so I'm happy to join the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert, for your sharing. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Thomas Tang, also known as Dr. T, Executive Director of AECOM, to share AECOM's ESG strategy and their approach to net zero carbon. Dr. T, are you here?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
cool.
here. Could you hear me?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Perfect.
I think if you could put my slides on,
yours.
please, Hong. Okay, all right. I have 5 minutes to present as a courtesy to the other speakers, so I'll try to go through this quite quickly. But really, this is a kind of a story of AECOM's journey into net zero carbon. And I won't draw reference, I'll draw reference to what the other speakers have said, because actually they've painted it out quite nicely in terms of the settings and the scenarios. And really, I want to focus in terms of what the actions are that a company like AECOM can do. So I'm conscious that some of you may not have heard of AECOM, but you know, others may have. So, but for those who haven't, just a quick introduction. AECOM is a global infrastructure consulting firm. And one of the advantages of being a global company is that we can draw upon resources from across the world, really to build the knowledge and the intelligence to develop solutions, you know, for pretty much anything. And in this particular case, looking at net zero. So when I speak about this, it's really in the global context, because we've committed ourselves to an ESG strategy. And as you can see in the writing there, the goal of our Sustainable Legacies strategy is straightforward: to ensure we embed ESG principles into everything we do. And there's 4 pieces to the puzzle here. The first one is to look at sustainable development and resilience across our work. So thank you, Albert, for that you know, description of the tool that you've been using. I mean, it's actually something that we have also looked at in terms of looking at economic, social, and environmental resilience. Second one is improve social outcomes. Again, it's about how we create social value in our work and in our projects. And then enhancing governance, which I think, as you all know, is the G in ESG. But I want to focus on the one that's encircled in red there, about how to achieve net zero carbon emissions. And really the challenge for us as a company is that, you know, how do we tackle this? Because we're already facing different parts of different aspects. So we have the internal facing, which is about how do we achieve operational net zero as a company. At the same time, really in our role as consultants to many major clients around the world, how do we help them build net zero into their projects? So I'm going to talk a little bit about operational carbon. So as you can see there, since FY16, we've reduced our total Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by more than 1/3. How do we actually know what our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are? We actually have a tracking system called FigBytes, which has been put in place since FY16 and earlier, and really to kind of look in terms of, you know, where are major emissions coming from. And not surprisingly, they're from our operations, energy, and transport. And we applied for our science-based targets initiative, approved emissions. And really what that's now kind of set us a very concrete goal in our minds to achieve a 20% reduction in Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 2025. But that is really just telling part of the story, because I noticed the diagram that Albert shared about Microsoft. We have a very similar kind of graph that shows us how we reduce our emissions up to 2030. And really Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are a fraction in terms of what we really emit. And you know, really to hit that net zero target by 2030, we have to look at our Scope 3 emissions. The third point there, is obviously related to current situation with a lot of people in remote working. But Workplace of the Future initiatives, I mean, something that we're building on, will really give us greater work flexibility and reduce our real estate portfolio by up to 50%. Now that again will add towards our reduction in operational net zero. Embodied carbon is something that I know that other speakers will speak about in due course. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but really the statement there is that if you don't recognize embodied carbon, as you could see on the right-hand side, which is the World Green Building Council zero carbon commitment, buildings commitment. I mean, really, you're missing a big piece of the cake here, because really, embodied carbon is the elephant in the room that we as professionals in this space have to recognize. So. The process we went through really was to look at the value chain. This is a very simplified version of the value chain. I mean, I actually teach on an MBA program. We use far more complex diagrams than this, but really the purpose of using this was to show, how would you deconstruct the value chain, where all the various emissions come in. So if you look from the left-hand side, really there we're talking about probably about 95% of our emissions, which is coming from the supply chain. And then really the margins, the small piece in the middle there, which is the net zero reductions for operations, fleet vehicles, purchased energy, and business travel, is broadly about 5 to 10% of our true footprint. So with that in mind, we really have to look at the upstream effects and the downstream, which is looking at materials, site locations, logistics, really to then work with our clients and really foster ways that they can reduce carbon in their projects through better design and better procurement. So walking the talk, this was really the journey that we went through. As I said, I've really kept this as a kind of a very personal journey that AECOM went through, starting with baselining, then developing our emissions targets, and then really kind of doing a bit of scenario mapping, because what would be business as usual, and then what are the gaps? Because the gap identification and opportunity review really drives the whole path towards how we reduce carbon internally and how we reduce carbon externally with working with clients and partners. And not forgetting again the obvious one, which is the cost benefit analysis. I mean, really this has to make sense, in a way that people can embrace the change and really kind of move forward in this. And then, as you can see, the final point there is our net zero roadmap, which is actually the thing that we're now working on and striving towards the target of net zero carbon by 2030. I'm going to just flick these on for a few seconds, because in the interest of time, there's actually a story behind each of them. But really, it's just an example of some of the projects that we're working on. If I could single out perhaps the one here, the net zero Teesside. I mean, this one is actually the UK's first zero carbon industrial cluster, which is really looking at carbon capture. I'm not sure Rachel might have come across this in maybe some of the research that ICE may have done, but this is actually one that we are particularly kind of interested in, because really this sets a precedent in terms of using an ecosystem to deliver carbon capture. But then the other ones, I think, all have their points of interest. I mean, obviously the hydrogen refueling stations, which we're doing working with Shell. As you know, fossil fuel companies now are under a lot of pressure in terms of reducing their reliance on fossil fuels. So something like hydrogen and renewable energy becomes a very obvious solution for them. How can we as consultants, and actually I would actually kind of encourage other professionals out there thinking about this, how would you as professionals work with partners who are kind of stranded, with these legacies of fossil fuels and very energy intensive industries? How can you actually get them out of this situation, through innovation and other clever means? The world's the Network Rail's 2050 environmental sustainability strategy. I mentioned this one because we've developed our own embodied carbon tool. I know Hong Kong has their own version, but we have a version as well, which, as I said, one of the advantages of working for a global company is that you really draw in the best from different parts of the world. And the last one here, those of you who are based in the US or follow basketball will recognize this as a stadium of the Sacramento Kings, where the energy here provided is 100% from renewable energy. So this one's actually, again, a kind of major step in terms of where infrastructure is going in the future. That's it. Thanks, Hong.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dr. T. Thanks for your sharing. Now, may I invite Ms. Amber Harvey from Group Sustainability Manager of Gammon Construction Limited. Hello, Amber.
Hi there.
Oh, cool, excellent. So now I'm going to share the slide from you.
Thank you.
No problem.
And thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to talk a little bit about a contractor's perspective. I think we've got a long way to go, and I'm glad that Thomas has started to talk about embodied carbon, because this is going to be a really big challenge for the infrastructure sector. Let's see if I can get this to work. Page down button. There we go. Whole life carbon. If we look at the whole life carbon footprint of buildings and infrastructure, we're starting to see opportunities, obviously, to reduce the operational carbon, but it's the embodied carbon that's a real challenge. We know that buildings particularly are becoming more energy efficient, power supplies are decarbonising, and I think we'll hear about that from CLP shortly. But it's the upfront carbon, the piece on the right-hand side there, which we're really concerned about, and it's going to become an increasingly large proportion of whole life carbon for buildings and infrastructure. We know that embodied carbon of materials is definitely more difficult to reduce. As Thomas said, 90% perhaps embedded in materials. And especially in a city like Hong Kong, where we have extreme weather events, limited land resources, and high-rise buildings with heavy deep foundations. But we certainly can't ignore that. And so the upfront carbon is really the important part. And as Thomas has just said, actually, this has been very recently recognised as being critical to the net zero carbon buildings commitment from the World Green Building Council, and they've now included embodied carbon in that commitment. So of the two parts of upfront carbon, how are we going to reduce the materials part? And I think it really starts looking at this diagram actually from the UK Infrastructure Carbon Review. Every part of the value chain does have a part to play. That includes the contractors, of course, but the opportunities to make impacts are obviously greatest at the beginning. It would be great to see carbon being used as a decision-making criteria alongside cost, program, safety, all of these other issues during the planning and design phase. And then life cycle carbon footprint could be used as a target during the design development to try and optimize material use. And of course, as contractors, we'd love to be involved in that through early contractor involvement, collaborative forms of contracts, design and build. And the project proponents themselves can specify lower carbon materials. We're now able to deliver on some of those. The green steel is still a challenge in the supply chain, but certainly we're producing lower carbon concretes already. And if we do things like have extended design lives and design for disassembly, then we can really start chopping away at that embodied carbon piece. We also hope that the regulatory environment gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of the methods and materials, and it would be great to see some bold steps being taken, particularly on projects like the new development areas, to trial some of these new methods that have been adopted already elsewhere. And we can all work together with supply chains to raise expectations and demand for lower carbon materials. We're already starting to work with suppliers to say, look, you know, what else can we provide together and what can we offer to clients? And of course, the methods, you know, how can we do more offsite, perhaps using cross-laminated timber and other, you know, new methods. And as I mentioned, the low carbon steel and concrete. And we're already seeing glimmers of hope in this area. The concrete and steel are obviously the most difficult parts to decarbonize, we believe, but we're already seeing examples of this kind of innovation happening. This was very recently the world's first fossil fuel free steel from Sweden. And the other aspect, then we've got the material side, and then what are we doing as a contractor on site? And Douglas has already touched on a couple of those things with the zero diesel generators. This is our view of what a zero emission construction site might look like, and this is what we're starting to work towards. Our plan is initially to electrify as much as possible, using hopefully greener, or we know it will be greener electricity supply and battery solutions like the Entertainer that Douglas mentioned from day one. And this is what we've been trying to advocate through the Power Up Coalition that Douglas also mentioned. And the early planning for temporary power is really essential, because especially for more remote or virgin land construction, because without that there really are fairly limited opportunities for diesel replacement. And then we need to phase out that diesel plant and consider alternative fuels where electric plant may not be feasible. So it's great to hear about potential opportunities in hydrogen in the future. And then the other aspect, then not only the energy, but also how, you know, the methods that we're using. You can see there an example at the top, one of the projects we've done, which is an MIC quarantine facility. That's accelerated in the last year or two. But basically standardization and repeatability. We need to think more as a manufacturer and less as a contractor. So that we can use resources more efficiently, produce less waste, and reduce transport to site. And the lighter weight construction will really help to reduce things like foundations, where we know this is going to be a challenge to transition. And of course, digital delivery of projects and digital twins to make sure we're rehearsing construction activities and designing out all of the potential issues before we hit the site. So just a few things to share with you. And of course, our lovely renewable energy on our roof at our facility in Chongqing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma, for your wonderful presentation. So last but not least, I would like to invite Thomas, CLP. Hello, Thomas.
Hi, Hong. Thank you for the introduction. Very happy to share the decarbonization approach from the perspective of the power sector.
Excellent. So I will share your slide now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And in Hong Kong, a very unique feature would be we do not have a lot of industrial activities in Hong Kong, and electric railway is already the backbone of our public transportation, and we do not have a lot of space heating demand in Hong Kong as well. That's why electricity is already a very high proportion in the final energy consumption, and it's going to get higher as more vehicles are electrified, and that presents a good opportunities and also big challenges for the power sector. On one hand, we could meaningfully contribute to the decarbonization journey of Hong Kong. But on the other hand, if we are to maintain an equally reliable and also affordable power supply while decarbonizing power, this is a great challenge to our power sector. And in the past, electricity generation actually accounted for almost 70% of the greenhouse gas emission in Hong Kong. But over the years, we reduced the use of coal and increased the use of natural gas and renewable for our power generation. That ratio has been reduced to around 60%. So the power sector now is in a good position to support Hong Kong's 2030 carbon reduction target. And if we look back to 1990, most of our power generation was actually from coal, and at that time, each unit of electricity was associated with 0.94 kilogram of carbon dioxide. But over the 3 decades, we significantly adjust our power generation fuel mix. Now, natural gas and also nuclear energy comprise most of our power generation fuel mix. And during this period, electricity demand has increased by over 80%. But on the contrary, the air pollutant emission has been significantly reduced by over 90%. And the carbon intensity of our electricity has been dropped to 0.37 kilogram of CO2 per unit of the electricity. And this is a significant achievement. And this level of carbon intensity actually is on par with most of the advanced economy in the world. And if the diesel and petrol consumers like the vehicle, if they switch to use the low carbon electricity from us, and that will help significantly reduce the roadside air pollution and improving the air quality of Hong Kong, as well as help mitigating the climate change. And from our estimation, using our power supply for the vehicle may help to reduce the carbon emission by almost 70%. But while the focus of today's discussion is on decarbonizing the power supply, but equally important is how to maintain the reliable and also affordable power supply to our customers. Balancing these important energy objectives is very critical to our economy, as the ratio of electricity in the energy end use is keep increasing. As engineers, we know that different forms of power generation will have different physical characteristics to our power system. Coal is the most carbon intensive one, but is highly reliable and also is cheap. And natural gas is lower carbon, but the price is very high, and it still emits carbon dioxide in the power generation process. Nuclear energy is highly reliable and price is reasonable. It's also zero carbon, but the public may have concern over the past nuclear incident in the world. Renewable energy is also zero carbon, but the supply is not very stable. Sometimes it's intermittent, and the price in Hong Kong is relatively high, and potential is also relatively limited. Zero carbon hydrogen is a potential game changer to the industry. But the price is highly uncertain. Even in the long-term future, there are a wide range of price forecasts from different analysts. And whether it could be sourced at a scale and a reasonable cost is still highly uncertain at this stage. And so as a power sector, and how are we going to do that decarbonization for Hong Kong? And CLP is planning to adopt a multi-pronged approach to decarbonize the power supply further for Hong Kong. And on one hand, in the near term, we will further reduce the use of coal for power generation, and natural gas and also renewable will be increased. And in parallel, we are also upgrading our clean energy transmission system with Guangdong. Upon the upgrade, we will be able to import more zero carbon electricity to Hong Kong to further reduce our fossil fuel consumption. And in near term, thanks to the technology improvement and also falling costs, we will be able to develop large-scale offshore wind farm in Hong Kong waters. And battery technology is also advancing quickly, and large-scale battery energy storage system could help manage our system demand and also help integrate more renewable and also nuclear energy to our system. And as the zero carbon hydrogen technology further improves and hydrogen supply is becoming available to Hong Kong, we could also gradually switch our natural gas power generation to the use of the hydrogen. But this is going to be a very long-term development. And COP Group has just announced our commitment to achieve a net zero emission by 2050. And in the coming 3 decades, we will progressively reduce our carbon intensity in each unit of our electricity supply. And by 2050, we'll be able to supply zero carbon electricity to our customers. So our Hong Kong business will also do our part accordingly. And that you will see that by use of electricity and further electrification of our economy, we will also support the decarbonization of the other sectors. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for your sharing. Thank you all speakers for your sharing. That's all very wonderful. Now we are going to move on to the panel discussion session. I would like to invite Mr. C.K. Mack to moderate the panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Hong. Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Hong, you have given me an impossible task. No, the presentation are so abundant with all the information, and it should be a full-day conference and a piece of information for everybody. We have over 500 attendants. You can see how attractive is this one. How can we run a roundtable in 15 minutes? No, so we have to be really, really, very efficient. Some of the panelists, I know that they have to attend another meeting. And may I just ask, if possible, we can extend this session by 15 minutes, say, for example, if it's possible. All right. Now, let me tell you that we have something like 5 or 6 questions already come up from the audience. I think some of the more administrative part, I will leave this to ICE and Hong. People ask for the recording or the slides and video and things like that. I will leave this to it. But there are 3 questions. One comes in very early at 4:47 by Gillian. And she made the particular point to Rachel in the your ICE second action item. You say that we are talking about new builds. How about existing infrastructure on refurbishment? New builds may be cheaper and less risky than refurbishment, but shouldn't carbon minimization be placed to offset the balance against simple financial costs, and if we are going to achieve net zero? Rachel, you'd like to quickly respond on that point first, and then we move on to other questions.
No, thank you, CK. So I think, yes, I can see Gillian's raising a couple of points there. The first one to do with focusing on resilience. Obviously, we heard from a couple of our speakers there to do with some resilience thinking that is coming through, I guess, in a climate-focused way. I see that there is a very urgent need, no matter what type of organisation we're talking about and what sort of stage in the business strategy process and delivery process they're at. Everybody, I think, needs to give more attention to thinking about the climate resilience risks that exist, bearing in mind that very often those risks will be very difficult to quantify. It'll be uncertainty as opposed to risk that we have to deal with in terms of what these various pieces of infrastructure will have to think about and deal with in future. On the point around refurbishment rather than new build, absolutely. There is quite a bit of evidence actually beginning to emerge in pockets around the world where people are showing that actually when you go for a project where you essentially make best use of what you've already got on site, you're adapting what's already there, you are evolving it, I suppose, to be in a future state that's usable, you know, for a different purpose or whatever it might be. Actually, the difference in cost is not as much as you might think, especially if we start to put a cost against the carbon that you are able to save as a result of that. And that, I think, will be the trigger that starts to flick that. We need to get much better at figuring out how to do that really well and making that element of engineering much more exciting, because it's really intelligent, smart work, complex work, trying to figure out how to do that in practice.
Thank you, Rachel. Other panelists, you'd like to supplement any points? I think Michael, yours is all on new builds, but do you like to say anything about the existing or the infrastructure? And we have consultants here. We have 2-3 consultants here. And anybody like to supplement on this particular point? We have to be super efficient, all right?
Perhaps I'd like to, I'm Michael, and perhaps I'd like to share my experience because when we actually, I repurpose an existing site office. It's a very traditional site office for the high-risk departments. It's standard. It's stood there for almost 10 years, and it's supposed to be demolished and then make way for to build other things. But I make use of that site office, refurbish it, and then turn it into a community liaison center, and also a co-location office for the central water consultancy study, the project team. So instead of building a new one, because it's much cheaper, and also we can reduce significantly on the carbon emissions by demolishing existing big structures and then rebuilding a new one. So I just want to share this. We're actually doing this. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I think, Donald, you have all the new building and existing buildings. I think from a bigger perspective, what would you like to supplement on this point?
Yes, I think absolutely this very important and crucial kind of questions, because apart from doing all the necessary action to save climate action for the new build, I think most cities, not only in Hong Kong, I think the existing buildings actually are the major energy user. So if we can find retrofit that could actually improve the efficiency of existing building, our equipment and system and so on, that would actually go a long way. And I think Hong Kong has actually been quite aware of the requirement. So for example, the Hong Kong Green Building Council has a special retrofit training and registration scheme for the refurbishment of existing building. And I think, again, is how we can, first of all, train more professionals and consultants that could actually apply efficient retrofit solution to existing building, and also make the property owner aware of the benefit, economic benefit, because that I think is one of the incentives that, despite, a bit of more capex cost in terms of a life cycle, long-term operation cost, they can actually be reducing the eventual operation cost and make the kind of payback period shorter for their equipment.
CK,
Thank you, Donald. Yeah.
May I jump in here, CK?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, just to build on Donald's point, real quick. Retro commissioning is now, I think, going to be more important in the future due to a global trend on future of work. Because now we're seeing work patterns have changed from typical office kind of settings to now people working from home, remote working, online working, etc. So I think this is going to be a trend that's now going to persist over time. And the other thing I would add to that is that we need to align this with digital design, because when you look at tools like BIM, which is really looking at how you deliver asset information in a digital form, you can actually plan and you can create scenarios in terms of what is best fits and what optimizes existing spaces. So as well as retro commissioning, which is looking in terms of how you redesign and refit the office, digital design can also be a very powerful tool in terms of innovative, providing innovative solutions of how people work and live in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Albert, that's a question actually directed to you. The question says that Albert Lai introduced some very helpful language, carbon avoidance credits, things like that, And the question is, how could Hong Kong real estate developers and Hong Kong infrastructure decision makers best communicate their commitment to and strategy for using carbon avoidance credits? I think, Albert, you'd like to respond to that, and all the panelists could also supplement later. Albert, would you like to say something?
Sure. But before that, I think this is related. I'd like to address also a comment by Donald and also Michael. Now, because Emma actually shared a very interesting slide. That slide shows that build nothing, you can reduce 100% of emissions. Build less, you can reduce 80% and so on. Build efficiently, only 50%. And so Thomas, I mean, however hard you work, I mean, for efficient building, that can only achieve 50%. Now, so the question for both Michael and Donald is very simple. For Donald, now I don't want to pinpoint to you, but you're the only developer around in the but
not to build our business.
No. Can you be the most profitable developer by building less, right? And for Michael, can Hong Kong be the most successful city by building less? Right. I mean, that is our objective, isn't it? I mean, because for net zero strategies, now, if we take a broader view, like Microsoft and so on, this is related to carbon avoidance credits. Now, because for net zero strategies to be successful, we need to change fundamentally our direction of investments. That means we need to invest in something different. For instance, let's say for China Chem, I mean, you can easily imagine a scenario. You build less, but for every building you build, you compensate for 100% of the carbon of your carbon footprint. How to do that? Obviously, you have to do it outside your value chain. For example, you become a builder for renewable energy, or you become a builder, say, for floating solar plants, so that you can fully compensate whatever new buildings you're going to build. So now, but to do that, we need the government to help, because the current government policy do not allow private investment into floating solar plants, or do not allow private investment, into offshore wind farms, for instance. Now, or you may not build those, or you may even build a different types of infrastructure, like coastal defense infrastructure. This is what we need for Hong Kong. When sea level rises and so on, we are one of the most vulnerable cities. I mean, government can take an active part in building coastal defense infrastructures. Just like Singapore is planning to do. With Dutch expertise and so on. So we really have to change our direction of investment now. And that is exactly how we can do a carbon avoidance credits. We look at the baseline of what we're doing. And then we look at how we invest differently so that we can actually reduce carbon. But there, one point I'd like to add is that for carbon avoidance credits, there is a lot of credible standards. This is not just Hong Kong saying this is a carbon avoidance by itself. So we have to go for a lot of gold standards or VCS and so on. So, but this is a topic that I'll leave it later.
Let me say something. Albert, I think we all understand that you are the advocate, all right? Yeah, and of our panelists and of the 500 people attending here, this roundtable, I think we all care about our environment. We all like to achieve something, but I think we have to look at the reality, all right? There's a dynamic of growth everywhere in the world. The reduction in carbon, the reduction or a sustainable way of growth that some sector of society like to see may not be compatible with the economic development or the prosperity that other sector are prepared to give up. This kind of issues is not a technical issue, it's a socio-economic and technical issues. And I guess we have to look at it from that light in order to understand this really what exactly is the challenge in front of us. So I like Emma and Thomas, you like to supplement the the presentation that you two gave are very down to earth and very nice. And Thomas' chart on this on the last one, the second last one about your different types of energy, electricity generation is very telling. You know, it's very easy. But you know, again, it points to exactly the question: who's going to do what? And is everybody accepting this? The smiling faces and the other faces tells the story. All right, you'd like to come in, Emma?
Can I be very cheeky and go back to the question on the embodied carbon and the build nothing scenario? Because I know we talked a bit about, sorry, CK, we talked a bit about the operation side, but we've had experience of doing, you know, exactly that, a refurbishment project, the Murray building in Garden Road in Central, converting it from an office building to a hotel. And I think, you know, there is it's a great way of saving structures and reducing embodied carbon. But I think there's also an opportunity for architects and engineers to think about how our projects going to be adapted, how are they going to be made flexible, how do we disassemble a bridge and refurbish elements of it so that we're not destroying the whole thing, or you know, whatever it is. I think we need to be designing with that in mind, because you know, our projects now are still going to be in place in 2060, but they should be going beyond that. And how do we design to make sure that we can extend the life as much as possible? Sorry to go back to that topic.
Well, thank you very much. I think we should let you speak on that one. Thomas, you'd like to say something?
Yes. From the power sector perspective, most of our greenhouse gas emission are direct emission in our supply chain. So it is very important that we really reduce that direct emission by switching to lower carbon or even zero carbon fuel or energy. And that's exactly what we are planning to do in the coming decades. But in doing so, we do recognize that affordability is very important, because our customers, they need to take that power supply, although it's good to be decarbonized, but we do need to consider their affordability. That's why, and on one hand, we are gradually reducing the fossil fuel consumption. But those generation capacity could still be used as a backup to secure or underpin the supply reliability. That is a good use of the existing asset to try to minimize the cost to our customers. So with this kind of consideration in place, I think we do have the confidence that we could progressively decarbonize our supply, and on the other hand, recognize the affordability of our customer and do it progressively. And it is very important that we reduce our direct emission, because a lot of your carbon footprint are actually related to our electricity supply. And we recognize that it is very important for us to first decarbonize. Otherwise, the carbon footprint of our customers, the other corporate, will not be reduced progressively.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your supplementary statements. I think what Albert said just now is a very fundamental issue in net zero carbon. But I don't know if anybody like to echo Albert's point, because that's really a not just a technical issue. It's a socio-economic issue, and unless we have government policy makers here, sometimes it's not easy for us to. We can just say, you can say something out of, as one of the questions say, out of the box. But we have to look at it in reality. And in the developing world, people may not look at this in the same light. Anyone would like to supplement this point or echo on Albert's point? Actually, Emma, you raised that in your chart. You say Bill Risley. That would be 50%. Bill Keffer. That's what you say. Yeah.
Yes, I don't want to comment, CK, on socioeconomic and government policy. Yeah, you know, for us, the opportunities for refurbishment and redevelopment exist. Also, there are opportunities for government making new development plans. So, and I think we need to make sure that people have a good standard of living. There's, you know, so many people in Hong Kong still living in poverty or in poor living conditions. So it is a very, very challenging question. How do you balance that with carbon emissions? So we really have to be as smart as possible, because we're almost certainly going to be building more. You know, I don't think we can avoid that. So we've just got to be as clever as possible in the way that we design and build, and be as efficient as possible.
One of the questions asks us, how do we communicate to the, I would say, to the general public of this whole thinking of this whole thing? Now, I worked in the government for 37 years. I have the understanding that, say, a policy like zero plastic bags, you know, in Hong Kong, we don't use plastic bags. You carry your own bag. But if you use plastic bags, you pay for it or something like this. When you come to net zero carbon, and we have more visible policy, more visible measures to encourage not just the developer, not just the contractor consultants, but the general public's awareness of this. Do you think that's not socioeconomic and policy? It's the community, it's everybody. Right, Rachel, you like to? You mentioned the 5 president succession is going to do something, and you say, could it be a UK standard or something? I think you are moving in that direction. Are you not?
Trying to, in various different ways. So, gosh, I mean, to me, you can't separate all these different things out, because this is the whole reason why this is such a complicated problem, because we're basically introducing a whole new lens on our thinking, which frankly, the vast majority of people, certainly in terms of the infrastructure and broad sort of engineering and construction spaces, have been largely blind to until now. So that is not a small thing to ask people to do at all. But I don't think you can separate the social, the economic and the environmental side of things. We have to find a way that these things go together. Now, I understand that in a political context, there are a lot of differences, obviously, as you go around the world. I mean, even to look between the UK and Hong Kong, things work very, very differently in terms of policy setting, in terms of expectations, in terms of speed of action from the moment you set a policy to when you expect something to have been done by. You guys are quite lucky in that respect. but what I would say on that is, I do think that the public awareness, the public engagement with this is absolutely crucial, because that is what will drive in time the policy setting that is required in order to generate the kind of change that we are going to need to see if we're really going to take this seriously. So to me, part of the answer to that, just very briefly, is we have to start to treat this like an emergency. We have to, because we're sitting here saying how terribly important this is, and we're all agreeing that there is a need for change. But unless we actually get on and make some of these changes happen in the areas where we can have influence now, we aren't treating it like an emergency, let alone everybody else out there. And that, to me, it's a very strange thing, isn't it? Because we treated COVID like an emergency, and that has been a global response. Admittedly, different practices, different policies, depending on where you are. Some have worked less well. We've treated that like an emergency. What do we need to do to treat these issues like a similarly urgent emergency? If we could start to do that, I think a lot of these other issues would actually fall away, because it would just become obvious that we have to make these changes. And actually, there are ways to stitch all these social, economic, and environmental issues together. We will find that blend according to context, but only if we get on and try to find it, if that makes sense. It's chicken and egg. We go around in circles on this, but otherwise we are simply wasting time.
Thank you so much. I think this is an next, yeah. Yeah.
Echo Rachel's point.
We are now overrunning already. We have 3 minutes more. I promised that we will finish at 5:45. So could I just go around and each one of you give a concluding remarks, and then we really have to ask Hong to organize another one so that we have a full day conference because it's unfair to everybody. You know, Albert, I think you are keen to say, but please limit yourself to 1 minute. All right, Albert?
Okay, fine. No, I just want to echo Rachel's point that this is really an emergency. I mean, in an emergency, we would have to think out of the box. We will have to, at the company level, we have to change our business model, meaning that we just can't keep on saying that, okay, you know, we have to build more efficiently and blah, 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 and that won't work. We know that this won't work. This won't get us to net zero. That's why I think that to get to net zero, whether it's the government, whether it's the developers or construction companies who really have to think through, change the way that we do things entirely. And that's what I'm suggesting. And that as an ICE fellow, I never feel confined to commenting on technical issues. I hope that is not a position of ICE as well. So socioeconomic planning issues, this is all in our realm. And as civil engineers, we have a duty to speak out.
Thank you. Yeah, Michael, you? 1 minute. Michael, you like something to say in 1 minute?
Yeah, I believe that we all share the same concern about or same visions of achieving carbon neutrality. So, okay, in the years ahead, in order to address the problem of climate change, and but I truly believe that no single party alone can solve the problem. We need a collaboration among all those stakeholders, and so as government officials working in the Sustainable Land Time Office and responsible for quite a number of major and land supply projects in Hong Kong, I'm all ears. I'd like to invite everybody, not just the panelists, but everybody in all the participants to contribute ideas, make some big suggestions to us on how we can do better to achieve carbon neutrality. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. Donald, would you say something?
Yes. Yeah. Again, I think it is time to back up the climate promises with actions. I think it is very important, not for ourselves only, but also our future generation. And obviously, private public collaboration will be required. I don't think the private sector can solve it alone, or the public sector can solve it alone. It really requires the collaborative effort from everybody, including everyone in the community. Developer, I don't think we would mind not to build, but also I think, you know, as responsible kind of corporate citizens, when we build, we will need to build smartly to ensure that, you know, we are contributing, not, you know, harming the environment.
Thank you so much, Emma. Your chart had brought up all these issues. Can you say something, Emma?
I think my parting comment would just be for us all to think of whole life carbon and how we can attack every part of that challenge. Yeah, that's I'll let you carry on.
Okay, thank you very much. Thomas, would you like to give a statement? Yeah, Thomas Steele.
Yeah, the power sector is the highest carbon emitting sector in Hong Kong. So we have an obligation to decarbonize, to contribute to Hong Kong. But while doing so, we need to work closely with the government and also our customers, because we need to continue to balance the reliability, affordability, and also sustainability of our power supply. So let's work closely with each other.
Thank you so much. On behalf of everybody,
excuse me, CK.
Yeah.
There were two Thomases here. I don't think I've had my chance to say.
I thought, Dr. T.
Sorry. Okay, CK. No, real quick. I think I want to return to the point of my presentation, which was on ESG. And I think whilst we recognize that climate is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in this century and for decades to come, let's not forget and remind ourselves on the balance of social, because this has come up in various passing comments, but I do believe social equity is a fundamental part of the solution here. And on that basis, I would say that the solutions that we need to look at are, from the one end of the spectrum, a carbon tax, which is going to be as popular as I don't know, it's going to be very unpopular, to a softer approach in public education. But I think the point here is that if everyone, faces the same challenges and aware of the challenge and actually is treated equally, by that I mean that taxation, as we know in Hong Kong, is not it's a very special system of taxation that we have here. But nonetheless, if we could formulate some system of channeling some of the income and the revenues from individuals and companies back into this challenge, I think we'll actually come up with a solution.
Thank you very much. I think I have to conclude this discussion session. I just want to add in my tokens. Almost 20 years ago, I went to Johannesburg with Albert in a different capacity. It's the World Summit of Sustainable Development, the UN conference. Three things I still remember very clearly. The motto of that particular conference is PPP, People, Planet, Prosperity. People, of course, is social acceptance. Planet, environmental conservation. Prosperity is economic development. It's in that order, I would say that. The second point is from agenda to action, to echo Rachel's opening remark. We have to take action. And the last remark was that we should go for partnership. I think today the discussion and all the presentation really cover all this in a much bigger context of the sustainable development. So on behalf of everyone, thanks all the panelists. Thank you we have over 500 attendees, maybe one of the largest we ever organized. Thank you for taking time. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for attending this. And I think Hong and ICE, we will try to let you have more information about this roundtable. Thank you very much. Shall we call it a session? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.